everyone. I am delighted to be here talking about all things autoimmune with Dr. Frank Lipman, integrative medicine pioneer, and Danielle Walker, author of Against the Grain. We are against all grain, I'm sorry, not against the grain. Although I guess it can be kind of against the grain too, right? Fantastic. Well, we are going to be talking about autoimmune. I know this is a topic that a lot of people have questions on, so if you're watching on Facebook, write into comments, let us know. We'll answer questions at the end. But to get started, Danielle, can you kick it off by telling us your story? You have a pretty powerful story to tell.
Yeah, so when I was 22 years old, newly married, just a couple of months out of college and just had gotten married, I started having all of these symptoms overnight. Nothing that could be explained, nothing that we saw coming. I just was having really bad digestive issues. I was tired all the time and was having just really bad bowel movements. I know that's a lot to talk about, but so I was 22 and we had just had no reason for it. And I saw a ton of different specialists in San Francisco, pretty much every GI doctor at UCSF, and had tons of tests done and wasn't diagnosed. And I heard everything from you need to eat more fiber to you may have colon cancer. And so it was frightening at 22. And we finally saw somebody who prescribed a colonoscopy. And I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is fairly similar to Crohn's disease, which more people are familiar with. And I was hospitalized and I was written prescriptions and sent out the door. And I just progressively got worse and worse. And I remember looking at the doctor when he first diagnosed me and I said, okay, what is this? Can I live a normal life? And he said, well, it's not curable, but you can live a normal life if you take these medications. And I specifically remember saying, can I have kids? Can I work? And he said, yeah, you'll be fine. And I realized very quickly, within a few months, that that was not a normal life. I had to take medical leave from my job. I was bedridden. I could barely make it up a flight of stairs. My husband was in law school at the time, so I was the one supporting us, so it was a really difficult time. And the medications, I was on 100 milligrams of prednisone steroids. I was on anti-inflammatory medications. And everything was just making everything worse. There were so many side effects that I wasn't told about. And I wasn't even given a description of what the disease was. I never heard the word autoimmune disease until I started doing my own research. I wasn't told what the symptoms could be, and so I just progressively got worse and worse. And I almost lost my life quite a few times over the next couple of years, where I had to have multiple blood transfusions to pretty much revive me. And I started just doing my own research. I had asked every doctor. I was young. I didn't have a nutrition background or anything like that, but I just said, what can I eat that'll help? I'm like, this is a disease in my colon. There's got to be something that I'm either eating or that I'm not eating that might be making this worse. And every single doctor I saw said, it doesn't cause it, it doesn't cure it, and food can't help it. And so after doing some of my own research, I started finding out that grains and dairy could be really inflammatory, and that a lot of people who had autoimmune conditions, and specifically Crohn's and colitis, celiac, had found relief by cutting out grains and dairy and kind of eating somewhat of a paleo-style diet. And within 48 hours of doing an elimination diet with a naturopath in my area, I had an 80% improvement of my symptoms. I was able to go off of the steroids, and I was able to avoid biologics. They wanted to put me on Remicade, which would have been like every 6 weeks, a 4-hour infusion, and it would have shut down my entire immune system. They kept saying, you can live a normal life if you do this, but you can't be around anybody who's sick. And if you get a staph infection, you'll never be able to get rid of it. And if you come in contact with anybody that has tuberculosis, it could be fatal if you're on this medication. And I was like, at that point, I think I was about 24, 25, and I was like, that is not a normal life. I'm young, I want to enjoy my life, I want to have children, I want to, be present for my husband and be back at work, and I don't want to be on these medications for the rest of my life. And they said if you ever go off of them, then your body will build, I wouldn't be able to go back on them because then it wouldn't work. And so those were a lot of options that weren't options for me. And so diet really saved my life.
Now, Dr. Lipman, you see so many patients. You've seen everyone through all these years. Now tell me what you're seeing about autoimmune conditions right now and what's different. What has you worried?
Well, first of all, Danielle's story is fairly typical. I'm seeing more and more 20-year-olds or young women in their 20s coming in with autoimmune diseases. And very often it's because of things we were talking about earlier. Their microbiome is out of whack. They're eating the wrong
I know
foods.
this isn't typical, right? And more typically you would see autoimmune conditions in people who are older. So that's,
Well,
has that been a big change?
Yep, in the older. I think in the last 5 years, I'd say this has become an epidemic. I think we just, scratching the surface now. It's becoming more and more of a problem. And that's because, autoimmune diseases are your body's making antibodies to certain tissues in your body. Now, what we do in Western medicine, we give it a label. We love labels. So if it's in the gut, you'll maybe call it ulcerative colitis. If it's in the joints, it's rheumatoid arthritis. If it's the skin, it may be psoriasis. So it depends where it presents, and then we give it a name, and we treat the name. And the treatments are often toxic. But we're not looking at what are the underlying causes or what are the underlying factors that are actually causing these problems. And when every time I see an autoimmune patient, there are 5 things I always look for. 6, but
so
5.
no matter what their condition is.
Yeah, it's always the same underlying problem. So you look at the diet, and what we're seeing over the years is too much sugar, grains. I never used to believe it. It's not only gluten, but actually all grains can be a problem. Vegetable oils, including canola oil, that was told is safe, but too many vegetable oils cause inflammation. So lots of foods in our diet are triggering this. And then the second big issue is what we call a leaky gut, which David Perlmutter spoke a little bit about. Our gut is 1 cell thick most of the way, and when that gets damaged, then food particles and toxins leak through the gut and then trigger a lot of these inflammatory changes. And what's happening more and more is people have a microbiome that's out of whack, the imbalance in the good and the bad bacteria, or an overgrowth of yeast or whatever it is, but there's a problem there, yeah.
So what are the key things that are the hallmarks of this condition? Like, how do you know if you have it? What might you be seeing in your body that indicate that this is an autoimmune condition?
Well, that's a tricky answer because you can have a lot of the symptoms of an autoimmune disease. So usually the gut is off whack, but you can have inflammatory changes anywhere. But how you get labeled with that disease is if they find antibodies to a particular part of your body. Now, many times they're not finding the antibodies. You still have typical symptoms of an autoimmune disease, but we haven't picked up that antibody. So it can present, most people present with fatigue and digestive problems and all sorts of non-specific issues all over the body. But let me just get back to it, because I think people should know the 5 things. It's diet, it's the microbiome that's off, it's stress. Stress is huge, folks. Stress can be a trigger. Toxicity, we're exposed to hundreds and thousands of chemicals on a daily basis, so too many toxins. And lastly, and which I'm seeing more and more of, are chronic low-grade infections. Someone, Ellie Hilfiger spoke about Lyme's disease. So Lyme's disease as one of them, but any chronic low-grade infection. So we look for all those factors, and often there's a combination of all those factors. In the old days, you used to change someone's diet and give them some supplements. It was fun. Now it's getting more and more complicated. We have to deal with all these different factors. So those are the 5 big factors. There are a couple others, but those are the 5 big ones.
Okay, let's talk about food for a second. You've both mentioned food. Let's get into the real specifics of it, because I think people are really going to want to know what foods can help them. Like, Danielle, can you tell us a little bit about what were the foods that were your triggers? What were the ones that you just have to stay away from?
Yeah, so I think in what I've learned and over this many years and after writing books and my blog and hearing from so many different people is everybody's bodies are different. And so one thing that I continually tell people is listen to your body. One of the things that I failed to do that my husband kept saying to do for years when I was really sick was keep a food journal. He just begged and pleaded with me. And at that point I was just too overwhelmed. I was like, I'm too sick. I'm already cutting things out of my diet. To be writing down everything I'm eating is just too much for me. And when I finally did it, I was like, like, oh my goodness, I wish I would have done this sooner, because there is
Was
a
it
real,
super clear?
oh my goodness, especially a digestive disease, but really all autoimmune diseases. And I think going back to your question too about symptoms, it's so hard to say one, because there's, I think, like over 400 known autoimmune diseases or something of that sort. So they present in all different ways, but there is such a direct correlation with food, especially for me. And so when I started writing it down, and I would eat something, and then I would notice the same symptoms 24 hours later, and I would look back through the week and say, oh, I had that symptom that day last week, and I'd flip back and say, oh, I ate that, So grains, dairy, legumes, beans, even if they were properly soaked, it just did not work for my body. But it's not only the things that I had to cut out, but some of the things that I needed to start doing that I wasn't doing. Fermented foods, I wasn't doing that. Things to encourage good bacteria growth in my body and my gut, and things to encourage healing, bone broth, getting collagen and gelatin into my diet. So those were things that actually didn't come until a bit later. I first just cut things out because it's just what I knew I needed to do. And then once I recovered enough to be able to start listening to talks and going to conferences and reading, different books and websites, I was like, oh, there's this whole piece that's missing of the healing portion. I'm cutting things out to cut out some of the inflammation and try to change my symptoms, but I'm not healing that leaky gut. I'm not healing, my gut to try to make myself healthier. And so when I started doing that, that's when I really noticed the major difference.
Okay, so for the folks out there that might be struggling with an autoimmune condition, who might think they have it, who might be on all those medications that you are on, what are the top 3 things that they should be doing immediately? Like, what are the top 3 changes? Is it asking your doctor for a certain test? Is it immediately keeping a food journal? Like, I know there's a whole litany of things in order to start feeling better, but what are the things that you do right away?
There are. My number one advice is to see a functional medicine doctor. Honestly, I think a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor really helped guide me, because when you're in it, and that is not my specialty. I mean, I've learned a lot now, and so I feel like I've become somewhat of an expert, but I'm not trained, and I feel like having somebody help guide you through that is so helpful. Even help guide you through an elimination diet, or help you get on some supplements to help, come alongside of the dietary changes and really start to support your immune system and your gut. Limiting and mitigating stress is huge. Autoimmune diseases are triggered by stress, and that's most likely why mine came out right when I graduated college and got married. And then I've had other episodes postpartum. I tour and write books, and so that typically will trigger an autoimmune flare-up with me. And so I've had to learn to really take care of myself. And then the diet definitely is huge. But I think having somebody that can help guide you is really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize, like many things, but autoimmune diseases are a good example. There are usually many factors, and they're often working together. So it's not just the diet; it's the diet and the stress, and they're trying to decrease chemicals in your life, sleeping better. It's lifestyle. It's like we should be doing with everything. It's lifestyle medicine. It's not just the diet. It's a combination of things. And the thing we do in functional medicine, we're looking for the underlying cause. It's maybe not the right thing to say on, but Western medicine doesn't deal well with autoimmune diseases, because they give you a name and then they give you a drug for it. That's not going to help the problem. It may keep the symptoms at bay for a while, but eventually it's going to pop up somewhere else. You've got to look for and deal with the underlying issues that are actually causing this imbalance in your system. It's the example I give. If there's a fire, the fire alarm goes off in here. We don't just take out the battery. We look to see why, where the fire and why the fire alarm is going off. So you've got to see why this inflammation is happening in your body. And as Danielle says, naturopaths, functional medicine doctors do that. So it's sad, but it's true.
Okay, great. Before we continue, let's take a moment and see if we can answer any questions. I know that we've talked about a lot already, and I want to see if anything's come up for anyone. Does anyone have a question? Yeah. Such a good question. So how do you keep a food journal without becoming neurotic about it?
It is a good question. It's actually something that I've not talked much about, but through middle school and high school, I dealt with eating disorders, and that was probably one of the biggest reasons why I had pushback on doing that. But when you're dealing with a chronic illness, that if keeping a food journal can help save your life, it just becomes part of that lifestyle. And I tried to find something that would make it easy. What I ended up doing was, my husband is an iOS developer, so he created this app where I could just snap a picture of what I ate and it would catalog it. And then if I had a symptom, then I could just kind of like type it in quickly. And I didn't focus too much on it. I think as well, I am in kind of the paleo community, and we don't focus on calories and fats and things like that. We focus on eating nutrient-dense foods and feeling well and finding wellness. And so I just kind of had to keep telling myself that. I'm like, this isn't, and also one part of my story that I left out was that when I would get sick, I would lose about 25 pounds in 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And so I didn't worry. I wasn't worrying about losing weight. Actually, I was trying to gain weight. So I was trying to get extra snacks in and fruits and nuts. And so I think you just have to really have the right mentality about it and know why you're doing it. And that will kind of keep you from being neurotic. But in a way, you kind of have to be neurotic when you're that sick, is watching every single thing that goes in your body.
Think of it as awareness training. You're just becoming aware of what you're putting into your body and how you're reacting. And keeping a food journal is a really helpful way of doing it. I mean, I think it's a good point. You don't want to become neurotic, but just think of it, it's like a meditation. You're just becoming aware of how your body's reacting to certain foods. Because, for instance, eggs, I'm a huge fan of whole eggs. And by the way, please don't count calories. And please don't order egg white omelets. I heard someone ordering an egg white omelet this morning. Eat the whole egg. But with autoimmune diseases, some people react to eggs. Some people react to nightshades. So although those are healthy foods, they can be reactive for some people. So we tend to start on a strict diet, and then people start introducing, let's say, the nightshades and see how they react. But really, it's just a process of learning about how you react and respond to food. And as you get better, as your leaky gut gets better, you tend to tolerate foods more easily. So it's a journey, and you've got to see it as a journey, and don't get neurotic about it.
Okay, let's see if we can answer any more questions before we're done. Yeah, please.
Is there any specific tests for leaky gut to actually show whether it's present or whether it's
Are there any specific questions
Yes,
for
great
leaky
question.
gut?
In New York City, we can't do those tests, but there are tests. There's a lab in Seattle, Cyrex lab, Wilkin probably are. New York City, we're not allowed to do most of these tests, which is unbelievable. But yeah, there are tests that can be helpful. I mean, these are new tests, so you've got to sometimes take it with a grain of salt, but you put it in the context of the whole symptom pattern. But there are tests that can be helpful, and in time, these tests get more and more sophisticated.
Is there a specific test you ask your doctor for, or?
What's a leaky gut test that? Cyrex does it. I can't remember. It's just called the leaky gut test. The regular doctors won't do it because it's a special functional medicine lab. And for those of you in New York, don't even bother. You can't do it.
All right. Anyone else?
There's one back there.
So the question is, have you worked with NRT?
NAET.
NRT.
NRT. What's NA?
So that's called nutrition response testing.
Right. No, I haven't. But all I can say from my experience with working with kinesiology, it's so determined by the practitioner. If you have a sensitive practitioner, it can be very helpful. So if you have a good practitioner, I'm sure it can be helpful. But I have no experience working with that.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one or two last questions. Yes.
This might be overly broad, but is there, with all the experience you've had with patients, is there one specific food that is almost time and time again the culprit for causing leaky gut?
So is there one specific food
Gluten.
that's the culprit for leaky gut?
Gluten, wheat, and then grains. I mean, over the years, I've developed, most of the people I put on is a no-grain diet because I'm seeing more and more people reacting negatively to grains. And I'll just say one thing about that. Wheat is not a genetically modified food. But wheat, all wheat in America and in Europe now too, is sprayed with glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. You know, Roundup is what they spray on genetically modified organisms, but all wheat in America is sprayed with this glyphosate because at the end of the harvest it makes it dry quicker. So we have this wheat sprayed with glyphosate, this toxic herbicide, which is also a registered antibiotic. It's a registered antibiotic. So you're spraying wheat because it's going to help the farmers make the wheat, you know, it's just quicker for them to get into harvest. So it's sprayed with this toxic chemical, which may actually be the problem. It may not even be the wheat, we don't know. In fact, most grains apparently are here. I'm not 100% sure. I'm 100% sure about wheat are actually sprayed with this stuff. Mm-hmm. So is it the actual grain now, or is it what they're doing to the grain? So if I had to choose one food, it would be gluten. But it's much more complicated than that. But if you're asking for a simple answer, gluten. It's the devil.
Danielle, I'm going to guess you back that one up.
Yes, I do. I would say for sure. And then I think what he said too, just about the specific foods. I think a lot of people that do have autoimmune conditions, but that's why I say watching. You know, I mean, I couldn't tolerate eggs for a while, and nuts, and what he said about nightshades, which if you're not familiar with that, that's tomatoes, eggplant, white potatoes, peppers, and those can cause real serious inflammation, especially for people with arthritis. And so I think I would say gluten for sure, but it's really hard to pinpoint just one because it really just depends on the person.
Right, everyone's different. I mean, some people are fine with eggs and nightshades, and some people are. I mean, that's what's so important. That's why it's so important to do a food journal, because there is no one right way. Everyone is a little bit different.
Right, you guys, we could keep you here all day talking about this. Thank you so much. Yeah. This was fantastic.
Thank you.